All right. Friday night in the States. It's Saturday morning in Indonesia, and we have a guest who has been up all night. The final day of Ramadan kept him up and partying. It's not nerves
Yeah,
to the interview. Welcome, Ben Dowson.
yeah, it wasn't intentional. I didn't, I didn't plan it that way. I was just saying to you before that, yeah, the mosque sort of, every morning it starts up at 4 in the morning for the prayer, but during Ramadan it starts up at 2 to get everybody woken up. So there's this guy shouting, wake up, start cooking, So if you haven't fallen asleep by about 1:30, then you're screwed really. So that's what happened. Anyway, I've got the coffee. I've got like 3 coffees here, so it should be all right. But if I start drifting off in the middle, like, you just got to blow a whistle or something,
All right, we'll find a way to do that. So, talk about Ramadan and talk about festivals. Where in Indonesia are you based?
in Jakarta.
Okay.
Yeah,
And so
yeah. No, it's obviously been a bit different this year and a bit sort of quiet because there's usually every night you've got big gatherings on the street and everybody's bombing about on motorbikes and basically basically the town wakes up at about 6 in the evening and then everyone sort of drifts off about sort of 2 in the morning and sort of has the final meal and then into the fasting, and it's very quiet during the day. Well, it's you can say it's quiet during the day because of the virus and that, but the nights as well. I mean, there's no real sort of excitement about it, But tomorrow's the big celebration, the start of the Eid festival, and usually everybody goes back to their villages, but that's all been all the roads have been shut down, so blocked
That's
off.
what I was
So
going
I
to
don't
ask
know.
because I lived in China for some years, and of course the Spring Festival, everybody heads home. So I was wondering if that's similar.
It could be, yeah, no. I mean, usually everybody would be home by now, but from since about 3 weeks ago, everyone has been sort of blocked off, and so I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow because if people can't celebrate, that's a potential riot situation. But anyway, we'll see. But no, it's all a bit quiet really compared to normal. But today is the last day of fasting, but I don't do fasting. My kids do, but I don't bother with that nonsense.
Okay. This will be an unfiltered interview, as we see. So, of the of some of the
Apologies to all our
travelers
Muslim viewers.
some of the
No, I'm a
travelers
lapsed Muslim. I am a Muslim, but I'm a very lapsed Muslim. So there you go.
I see.
Takes all sorts.
So we've got a question right away, which I was getting into. Simone from Brazil is asking, what are you doing in Jakarta? So you've been there 3 decades.
Yeah, I came out in '91 and just sort of stayed really. I did try to leave after a couple of years, but I got called back, and one thing led to another. I went out originally teaching English, and ended up running oil and gas companies. So go figure. It's the kind of place where that can happen. You just sort of fall into it. Really, I've never really had a plan to stay here that long. But it's interesting. I'd actually been out on a school expedition in Malaysia, on the Borneo side of Malaysia, Sabah, Sarawak. And I remember, we had a map of Malaysia, and of course, the map of Malaysia sort of shows most of Borneo completely white and empty as Kalimantan. And I thought, one day I'll go down there and have a look around and see what's there. And about 5 years later, after graduating and that, I came out here. I lived in West Africa for a while. I was in Mauritania after I graduated. I was in Mauritania for about 6 months. Basically because I just got stuck there. I was hitchhiking down through Africa, and I just I got tired really. So I ended up living in Mauritania for 6 months, and then I lived in Côte d'Ivoire in Abidjan for about 9-10 months, and then my dad died, and I had to go back to the UK. And once I'd sort of sorted everything out back there, and everything had sort of calmed down, I thought, well, I've been teaching English sort of, on the side. I thought, maybe I'll carry on for a while. So found a job there were three job opportunities came up. One was in Spain, which I thought was kind of boring and too close. One was in Poland, and the guy said, oh, we want you to be the head of the school. I said, well, I haven't got any qualifications. So I thought that was a bit shifty, and it was. Basically, they couldn't find anybody. It was in somewhere like Katowice, like a You know, it wasn't. It was like an industrial town, and nobody wanted to go there. And the other one was Indonesia. So I thought, yeah, okay. So here I am. Yeah, 30 years later. You see the result.
It's I'm from Minnesota in the U.S., so all the charms of Indonesia aside, the climate, I would have I spent a semester in Hong Kong, and that's about the hottest climate that I can try to survive in. I
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
like
no, it's similar. It's similar. I've basically spent 30 years in a sweat. I mean, you have, apart from, you know, trips to Siberia and that. I mean, that's probably why I do it, to get out of the muck heat, you know. But
talk about
yeah.
talk about Mauritania, which is one that I would say visitors like myself in the past few years feel like that might be one that hasn't changed as much as since you visited as many parts of the world.
That's interesting, actually, and a couple of guys were back there recently. Um, April, I think, EPS member, and yeah, no, a couple of you know, sort of travel mates I've got to know, you know, over the last 2 or 3 years. I've been there recently, and so it was interesting to sort of compare notes. You know, what happened with me, I was basically hitchhiking down through Europe, and then I you know, went down through Morocco, and you couldn't, you know, 1990, you couldn't cross the border. You couldn't get down really to Dakhla even. I mean,
Oh,
basically you
really?
get to Lake and basically stop. So I thought, well, I didn't want to fly, so I thought, well, I'll try and find boats, and I couldn't. So I ended up flying to the Canaries, and then from Las Palmas down to Nouadhibou, and yeah, I think sort of that was part of the reason why I sort of thought, well, it's been such a hassle to get here. I might as well sort of, you know, spend some time here. So and this thing that everyone does, they're riding the train. So I rode the train. I don't think the train has changed at all. You know, from recent reports, it seemed to be exactly the same. But I mean, no one was riding it. I mean, there was no one. You know, 30 years ago, there was no one there. It wasn't like a thing. But I just sort of saw this train leaving, so I thought, oh, I'll jump on that. And then yeah, I got off before it headed up to Zurat and that, and yeah, I just sort of found my way to Tizigja in the middle of the desert. And I jumped down off the truck. I mean, there were no, you know, sealed roads. I jumped down off a truck after, must have been 3-4 days of travel, you know, riding on top of the truck. And chief of police collared me and said, well, what are you doing here? I said, well, you know, I'm just sort of traveling. He said, well, how long do you want to stay? I said, well, I'm kind of knackered. Might stay a while if I can. He said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, you know, I'll teach English. He said, well, fine, I'm your first student. So
Yeah.
he says, come back tomorrow morning, we'll sort something out. So, I mean, literally, what I did, I ended up teaching English to sort of random, you know, not bigwigs exactly, because it was the middle of the desert. There weren't any bigwigs, but like, you know, people who could afford it, basically. Sort of random people from the town. And yeah, I built up quite a little sort of, I don't know, private school. And then, of course, we had the Gulf War coming along, first Gulf War, and I made the mistake of asking the chief of police, who was like, then he'd become my best mate, about missile silos that Saddam Hussein was reportedly building out in the desert near Tizigja. And then I got shut down very quick. I actually went out with a truck to try and find them, because I figured I'd, you know, become a sort of BBC reporter, because, you know, all the reporters, the Senegal border was closed as well, so it was quite interesting. I was basically stuck in the middle of Mauritania, and all the journalists were trying to get over the border from Senegal, and they couldn't, because the Mauritanians and the Senegalese were burning each other, throwing each other in ovens, and burning them alive. So so I was there. So I thought, oh, you know, this is my golden opportunity to be a, you know, a major reporter. But no, I got shut down by the chief of police, and then I had little kids chasing me around town, calling me a spy, and which I kind of was for a while, and I had to basically get out of town fast. So that ended. It ended in a little bit of a little bit of a debacle, really. And I haven't, to be honest, I haven't been back since. I mean, not you know, not to visit the place. And it'd be good to go back. But yeah, I mean, by all accounts, it is one place that, you know, doesn't change that quickly, I think, you know. So yeah. would be interesting to go back. I went back to Abidjan the other day, last year, because I'd lived in Abidjan for 8-9 months, and I thought, well, I'll go and try and find the place where I lived. You know, I lived in a little cul-de-sac right down by the Canal de Bridi, and the whole place was completely different. I mean, you know, built up, and you know, I couldn't find any landmarks or anything. So, you know, things change. But
And that's a fascinating city. That one.
Yeah, I mean, you expect the cities, especially in Africa, to change. You know.
Yeah, I mean, Abidjan, I'm thinking, I mean, that was by the biggest surprise of a city for me in my West Africa travels. It seemed like it was out of like a Jean-Luc Godard movie from the 70s, the design and all of that.
Well, up on the plateau, what they call the plateau, where I worked in a little language school up there, and that hadn't changed that much. But you know, when I was there were middle of 1990. I arrived there. You know, there were 30,000, 40,000 French, and you know, apart from like a whole, you know, the Foreign Legion and all was there as well. But I mean, there were 30,000 French expats there, and it was really, it wasn't a French city, but I mean, there were pockets which were really sort of, you know, very heavily, you know, expat, and you know, you could buy your bon maman confiture, and you could buy your French bread, and you know, it was basically the sort of jewel of West Africa, and parts of it hadn't changed for sure. I mean, like the sort of central part of the city, but the rest had just sort of, you know, massively expanded around there. I lived in a brothel for a couple of weeks. I had malaria, and I couldn't sort of get off my bed. I had prostitutes banging on my door literally every couple of hours, saying, you know, either do you want some, or you know, or the proprietor saying, get out, you're costing me money. And I was laid out on bed with malaria. And I arrived, when I arrived in town, I arrived in that area of town, and that sort of brought back a few, dodgy memories. But yeah, no, things changed for sure. But not everything changes, and that's good, really. I think that's one of the sort of interesting things about travel, you know, especially when you've been traveling for 30, 40 years, is like which places have changed and which haven't.
Yeah, and well, you've got, I guess, a friend of yours, Phillips Connor, says, "Hey Ben, nice to see that you're famous." So you've got some fans tuning in.
I wish.
We've had a few guests this week who have all claimed to be introverts, and they're incredibly extroverted travelers. So I don't imagine you would claim to be an introvert, or you were the quiet one in growing up. It's you know, you just turn up in Mauritania and say, I'm spending a few months.
No, it's interesting. I never really know what, you know, how to define introvert and extrovert, because I think, you know, most people are bits of both. I did spend the last 20 years fronting a Blues Brothers revival band, and you need to be a little bit out there. Yeah, we had a 13-piece soul band. So, so you have to be, you know, and we always sort of dressed up in the sort of like the full Blues Brothers. You know, I did the Dan Aykroyd bit, harmonica and that. And I think you need to be a little bit out there to do that. Especially here, of course, you know, being you know, quite a more conservative society, let's say, than you know, or a more conservative audience than you might get in sort of Chicago or something. So yeah, I mean, I guess no, I guess I'm sort of reasonably extrovert, but I mean, I'm not that sociable really. I mean, no more than anybody else. No, I have a lot of friends who are a lot more sociable than I am. That's for sure. So I don't know.
And something got you strolling down West Africa, and one of the questions is, were you teaching English to the French in Abidjan? And I've worked with a few Brits that make a habit of pronouncing French as badly as they possibly can to make a point, and then others that try to learn and get along.
Well, I do speak French fluently, so I mean that's always an advantage when you certainly when you live in a place like West Africa. But I did have a couple of I mean, when I was in Abidjan, it was like proper teaching. I'd actually got sort of, you know, a basic qualification. before I went out there. No, no. I'm talking nonsense. I had no qualification at all because I was on my foot. It was part of that Mauritania trip. So no, I had no qualification. But I mean, it was a proper place, you know, and I kind of knew, I'd got a little bit of experience under my belt. But I did have a couple of, sort of a couple of French, I think, in there. They were mostly young Ivorians, you know, usual, you know, young sort of business people. A lot of Lebanese there, of course.
Oh yeah.
I had a whole class of Lebanese, more or less a whole class of Lebanese at one stage. But yeah, mixed.
Familiar about the Lebanese diaspora in West Africa, or in other parts of the world? Can you encapsulate it a bit?
Well, it's very similar to sort of the Indian diaspora in, well, not so much now, of course, but you know, post Amin, but you know, the traditional Indian diaspora in East Africa. And I suppose everywhere else, the Chinese diaspora. I mean, they're the, you know, especially out here. I mean, they're the, you know, they were the merchants. A lot of Mauritanians, actually. It's interesting, and I noticed this even the last time. I've been in West Africa about 5 times in the last 2 or 3 years. But yeah, the last few times I've been in West Africa, I really noticed, you know, even in the smallest sort of village, like in Gabon or somewhere, you know, you'll find a Mauritanian shopkeeper. They seem to have basically, you know, covered the whole of West and Central Africa. So I mean, you know, the Lebanese were sort of, they were a step above that. I mean, they had the businesses. I don't know how it is now, but certainly at that time it was, you know, there was a big community. They were well integrated as well. You
know? And talk about expat life for those that. Maybe they've stayed a few months. So like at the beginning of your travels, you stayed a few months here, a few months there, and now you've been based in Indonesia for 30 years. Talk about and contrast that.
Well, I never sort of went. I mean, when I came out to Jakarta, yeah, I mean, I'd actually gone to interview somewhere with a teacher came and sort of interviewed a bunch of people for, you know, for teaching positions in a language school in Jakarta. But it was, you know, it was one step above backpacking, really, you know, like backpacking around finding a job. It was, I mean, we had contracts and that, so it was a little bit more formal. But I never done the sort of expat thing where, you know, you go out as an expat and you arrive in a foreign country as an expat, sort of on an expat deal. And you know, you get put in a house somewhere, and you know, then your neighbors, you know, Jane and Roger come round and say, you know, welcome to, you know, Jakarta, and you know, here's a list of things, here's a list of do's and don'ts, and you know, come and join us, you know, for Sunday evensong, and you know, Wednesday is track and field, you know, hash harriers or whatever. You know, I never had all that. I mean, definitely when I was prior to this, so in West Africa, it was very, very, you know, it was informal. So it was more like, you know, you're backpacking through a place, and you know, you need some dosh, so you stop and you work. I mean, I went around Australia for 6 months, you know, doing that, as most people have, you know, and the States as well, picking fruits, and it was not dissimilar to that. I just, when I graduated, I just didn't know really what I wanted to do. I mean, I knew what I didn't want to do, which was sort of go and work for Procter and Gamble, like all my mates were doing. And you know, I'd always wanted to travel, and I'd done traveling like everybody, you know, in the summer holidays and stuff. So I figured, well, I'd just sort of carry on. And so I thought, well, I'll hitchhike down through Africa. So that's what I did. But when I came out here, you know, after my dad died, and I came, and I thought, well, I don't want to give up sort of seeing the world, basically. And I came out here. It was still pretty informal, and that was good in a way. I mean, we were young. I mean, you know, I was 25, and that was great in terms of, you know, getting close to, you know, local people. And I mean, all my students were local. I mean, we were teaching, you know, university kids and some high school kids, and you know, we sort of rapidly developed. I mean, a lot of the students became, you know, good friends, and you know, we got invited out and, you know, around to their place, and hung out on the weekend, and I suppose it was great for learning the language and so on, and sort of assimilating, And so I never really sort of had that sort of expat shock, where you land in a place and.
Mhm.
But then later, of course, obviously, I ended up, as I say, running engineering companies, and one thing led to another, and so I was sort of a cheap and cheerful expat at the best of times, and I never really got into the sort of expat scene, I suppose.
Yeah, I felt that way in my own experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as I understand, Bahasa's probably it's considered an easier language to learn to speak than a lot of people
Well,
might.
there's no heavy grammar. I mean, it's a little bit, like anything. There's a formal language and an informal language, and if you want to sort of learn the basics and get by, well, I would say it is pretty easy. It's basically just putting words together. Yeah, a lot of people never really sort of get past that, and never need to get past that stage. But if you're going to be giving speeches, for example, or you're in a situation where you need to use a more formal language, then grammar creeps in, as it usually does, and you have to watch what words you use and so on. But yeah, no, I would say it's a simple language, really, compared to most of the European languages. And, yeah.
You mentioned fruit picking in the U.S. for a time. That's my home country. What did you learn about the U.S. from that experience?
Oh, that was 87. That was a good summer. That was. I was 21. I turned 21 that summer, and my folks said, "Oh, do you want a car or something? I mean, we should give you a gift, If you get a car might be a thing." I said, "Well, just get me a plane ticket to DFW." So that's what they did, very reluctantly. I flew into Dallas, and I had about 10 weeks, and I just sort of set off hitchhiking around. It's pretty much the whole of the sort of western half of the US, and down to Mexico as well. Went down there, rode the freight trains. That was fun. And yeah, it was great. I would stop literally. I went from Dallas up to basically through New Mexico. I ended up in Colorado, and I was just asking around, and just literally found a job. I think the first farm I asked, and and then it was a bit like a community, really. You'd pick whatever. You'd pick cherries for a day or two, and then somebody would say, "Oh, well, we're going up the road to pick, whatever." Say, "Okay, well, I'll go do that." Earned about $50 a day. That was enough to keep me on the road for about 4 days, to be honest. Back in 85, 86, 87. No, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Tried hitchhiking again in 2015. That was the last time I was in the States. Wasn't quite as easy, but it was still all right. It was still managed it, and people still pick me up. And I don't know. I stayed the weekend at one guy's ranch and had a lot of Jesus guys, give me a lot of pamphlets, usual stuff. But it was nowadays. I think nowadays it's obviously not as easy, because they don't think, oh, young guy, student, let's give him a ride. That sort of, old guy must be a bum.
Yeah.
Let's pick him up and give him $20 and talk to him about Jesus. So it's kind of a different thing, and it's a different vibe. But it's still a lot of people pick you up. I was planning to do it again this year, actually, but I don't think that's going to happen.
I think listening to you this far, you could be the expat type who enjoys his perch and maybe goes to a hill station or the occasional beach and loves the life. But then I'm also looking at your Nomad Mania profile. So we've got 193 UN.
Oh yeah. It does, yeah. I finished my 193.
Yeah. 487 MTP, 724 Nomad Mania. So this is not a person just enjoying the expat life.
Well, no, no. So the 193. I just that was obviously that. There comes a point when that becomes a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
To go to every you know, UN member country, member state,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for obvious reasons. I'd round about, I suppose it was about, yeah, turn of the century, I reached 100 countries, and I had a mate, an old college mate who was also traveling a lot, and I think we reached 100 countries together. We worked out, and that was 20 years ago. So it wasn't something that, you know, sudden. I mean, I guess it wasn't so much of a thing 20 years ago, is what I'm saying. But I read the book by John Todd, you know, the first guy, or purportedly the first guy to travel to every country in the world, and I love that. I mean, his stories about traveling in, you know, in North Vietnam and getting into China in '75. I mean, this was and trying to get to Cuba, you know, spending months trying to find a way to get to Cuba. So that was quite inspirational. And then around about, you know, was it 2003, 2000, maybe 2005, I found this MTP site, and you know, Charles Veely's site, and yeah, so he put it all online, and so I sort of logged on, and Charles Veely became a hero. I think to be honest, if you'd have asked me, what, 2006, 2007, you know, who would you most like to meet in the world, it probably would have been Charles Veely. I think he would have knocked off Elvis Presley from the top of the list. Yeah, no, he was like the hero. The guy would report every week where he was in the world and how he just sort of, you know, chop it into Bouvet Island or Peter the First Island or something. So this guy was, he was off the charts. I thought, I want to be Charles Veely.
And talk about that list and how it shaped your travel.
Yeah. So then, I mean, I suppose he was responsible for sort of imbuing me with this sort of sense of this systematic travel idea, and sort of the, you know, traveling to every country, and then the nomad mania was a much later thing. And I was just saying to you before that I fought against joining that, because I thought, well, you know, I'm already sort of dealing on one side. You know, why dilute things, or why make things more complicated, and, you know, join this new site. But you know, I sort of became a convert, and it's sort of a different site, and it's you know, again, sort of, it's become much more comprehensive, and it's good. It's a good way, to be honest. It's a good way to travel. I mean, you look at the world and you think, well, geez, I've traveled, you know, a fair amount, but I haven't really traveled anywhere at all. And, you know, on the other side, I mean, I don't think I could name a country that I've really seen comprehensively. I've been to them all. So I suppose Indonesia, I suppose UK, I suppose there's a few, but not that many. So there's a lot of travel still to do, I guess, is the point.
Well, let's talk about Indonesia. That's incredibly diverse in so many aspects, however you measure it. Take the number of islands. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And
well, no one knows how many there are, for a start, so you can see how complex at least the geography is. Yeah, I mean, one of my things is climbing mountains. So I think I've seen quite a lot of the country from that aspect. But I took, even when I was teaching in the early days, back in '93, I took basically a sabbatical. I said, well, I'm taking a term off, and it was easy to do because there were like 50 teachers there, so it was easy for people to cover. So I said, well, I'm taking a term off. So that was 3 months, and I basically just went, and I went out east, and that was the sort of most comprehensive trip I've done to date. I mean, you know, more recently it's been little trips, you know, going to a certain place, climbing a mountain. But the great thing is nowadays, with the number of flights and the number of airlines. I mean, there are about 50 airlines in Indonesia, I think, something like that. It's ridiculous, and, you know, dirt cheap. I mean, you can basically, if you've got a 4-day weekend, you can fly to the other side of the country and have a good long weekend, relaxing or climbing a mountain or whatever it is. But you mentioned Papua. I haven't actually I had a job. I've had a couple of jobs out in Papua, but only on the coast, in the coastal cities. I haven't been inland like most people do, and sort of, you know, seen the sort of more traditional side. And I still I still like to do that. The problem is, of course, wherever I travel, I always feel I don't have enough time, and I always want to know what's over the next horizon. And I think with Papua, it would be very much like that. So I think probably the thing to do is to go climb Carten's Pyramid, which is one of the 7 summits. So yeah, if I ever thought about doing the 7 summits, I'd have that under my belt.
And Mehul is asking, have you climbed, is it Puncak Jaya?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, Carten's Pyramid, yeah. Puncak Jaya. I haven't. That's a 7 or 8 day hike, I think. I met one of the guys, you know, one of my travel buddies, Bruno, was a 7 summits guy, and he was talking about Puncak Jaya, Carten's Pyramid. It's the same. It's basically the same mountain. He was talking about it. He said it was a complete nightmare. He said we nearly died. So I said, okay, well. But I know I've been wanting to do that for years. Sometimes it's off limits, and sometimes people get shot and killed. It's one of those things. It's a bit like, you know, going into Virunga, you know, climbing the volcano there. And for example, that just closed down the other day. Some bunch of guys got shot, right? So it's that kind of situation. It's a little bit unstable. So yeah, no. So Papua, I haven't really explored. I'd love to spend a month. Just a month or two, just in Papua. Most of the rest.
Have you been to the Korowai area of Papua? Matthew Allison is asking.
No, as I say, I haven't spent a lot of time in Papua. No.
Okay.
No. Yeah. Which I guess is where a lot of EPS and MTP and sort of hardcore travelers would naturally gravitate towards. But I think the rest of the country, I've pretty much, well, I've seen a lot for sure. I mean, there are always islands that you want to go, and I could give you a list of at least 20 places in Indonesia I'm very keen to go, but you know, there's always a list, right?
Oh, pick 3 of them.
There are 3 islands called the TNS Islands after the names of the islands, and they're very, very remote, in the middle of the Banda Sea. So everyone knows Banda, the Banda Islands. They're very famous. But there are these islands that they were evacuated in the 60s because all 3 volcanoes on them erupted, and but in the last sort of 20 years, people have gone back, and it's one of those places, or those 3 islands are, you know, one of those places where you basically. There's no scheduled boat or anything like that, so you just sort of have to hang out in the nearest port on the mainland and just wait for the boats to appear. I've always been attracted to sort of remote places, I guess. So the Aru Islands off Papua are also another area. But again, I mean, Raja Ampat. I mean. Diving, and it's fantastic diving in the Raja Ampat area. They recently sort of developed it. I mean, I'm saying recently, in the last sort of 10 years, it's sort of become a mega diving hotspot. And yeah, I'm a part-time diver.
All right. Well, we've got Elvis appearing.
Billy is there. I can't believe he's there.
Hey Ben, what's going on?
Hey, how you doing?
I pulled over the car.
Did you hear me extolling your praises?
No, I didn't.
Oh, really?
No.
I said that if somebody asked me, who would you in 2007, who would you most like to meet? I would have had to say Charles Feely, rather than Elvis Presley. I mean, having met you, I mean, yeah, it was a intense disappointment, and Elvis now tops the list.
13 years later, I know I haven't aged well. You've aged
All right.
You're looking very Californian today, Charles.
Yeah, well, that's where I am. I'm in San Francisco. I'm locked down here. Got to make the most of it.
Last time I spoke to him, he said he was doing 3 trips across the country to collect air miles.
Yeah, and
I
it
guess
turned
that's
out
the
that they just gave me the status without doing anything, so that was a waste of time.
Okay. Well, you're looking well for it anyway.
Like, where are
He
you?
came,
Are you in Jakarta?
Yeah,
Where
shut up now. Shut up now. This is my time. So, Stefan, Charles came. Charles came he stayed with me, I don't know, about, what was it, it must have been more than that, a few months ago anyway. Back end of last year. Was it back end of last year? Yeah, back end of last year it must have been. Came to stay because he'd got 3 critical places he wanted to see.
Yes.
I thought he'd never get out my swimming pool.
Including the pub around the corner from you.
Yeah, no, I know, yeah. He took me off to a bar. We had too many whiskeys. It was good. Anyway.
All right, so now you got to get back on the road, Charles.
We jumped into his swimming pool from the balcony on the 2nd floor.
No, I got up at like 5 in the morning and you were there, sort of immersed in it. I thought you'd drown. But then suddenly sort of you clicked on to systematic travel. This systematic travel, just sort of clicked into gear. It's like, shit, I got to go. I've got to go to Ternate, and then I've got to go to God knows where else. I said, Charles, you can't do that. That's impossible. Anyway, he did it. Oh, and then I've got to get back to California for my son's football match on Saturday. Mind boggles,
It helped me to need to go due to the fact that you were kicking me out of your house. But
well, it probably was. I was saying, get gone. There's no way you're going to do it.
No, we were enjoying, but I had booked like a 6 a.m. flight or something to go to East Timor. I forget where I was going, but you had a lot of advice.
Yeah, the guy. Well, somebody had to advise you, but I was advising negatively. I mean, that's the thing. But that's the difference between guys like me and real travelers. You see, they don't take no for an answer, even when there's no flight going there. They'll find a way.
I can't wait to see you in person again somewhere.
Well, the US road trip, you see.
Better than
the US road trip.
Oh, that's right. We're going to do the US road trip.
So, Stefan, on the US, because you were asking about US. So the whole, there's half a dozen, I would say half a dozen states that I haven't been to, and they're all in that mid. I've only crossed the Mississippi once.
Oh wow!
So go figure. And I've been, I've been pretty much all around the states, but then there's this whole sort of swathe of sort of middle US, mid US, all those states beginning with M and I that I haven't been to.
I'm from one of them. I know it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So yours is one. So absolutely.
Yeah.
And as I said, I'm a blues singer. I'm a soul singer, and I haven't been to Chicago. I haven't been to New Orleans. I haven't been to Detroit. I haven't been to St. Louis. I mean, what is that? That's just nonsense. It's nonsense.
I think Harry needs to demote you from Nomad Mania ranking. Charles needs to kick you out of MTP.
No, MTP you can never be kicked out of, because now he's developed this app. So I was walking down the street in London the other day, and suddenly this thing pinged in my pocket. So what the hell is this? It said, "You are in the Hotel St. Regis, or some fancy hotel. Do you want to check in?" I was like, I wish. I was in Copenhagen. That's right. Heading to the youth hostel, and it says, "You are in hotel. I don't know what. Do you want to check in?" I was like, "Yeah, right." Next door at the youth hostel.
So that's a great promotional plug for the MTP app. The Android version was just released to the public yesterday. So what better endorsement than checking into luxury hotels and Oxide Chin and everywhere in between?
Yeah. It will tell you if you're in Minnesota also.
I know.
The thing about the MTP, of course, is that I mean, Charles has always been sort of obsessed with like me, sort of remote places, and it's just I've never had the dosh to go to them. But the concept of going to sort of Bouvet Island and Peter the First and the furthest, the most remote island in Micronesia. This is for me. This is kind of a thing, and it's different from Nomad Mania. Nomad Mania doesn't really sort of focus on islands because Harry has never been big on oh, they're just rocks in the middle of the ocean. They don't have it. Nobody lives there. There's nothing to see. So he's got a point as well. Of course, he's more sort of on the culture and stuff. Charles doesn't give a rat's ass about culture. He just wants to, if there's a rock in the middle of the island, he wants to go there. So I kind of straddle both. I understand both, both concepts, and that's why Veely is still relevant, really.
Yep. Well, we get on quite well, Harry and I, and so.
I know. It's good. It's good.
More of that. If you want to talk about I can leave now.
Okay.
Yeah. By the way, it's my show. It's my show.
Thank you for the cameo.
Good to see you.
See you.
Bye.
No, it helps. Seriously, I mean, it helps the community. I mean, they have also the Traveller Centric Club. So I mean, actually, I heard about Traveller Centric Club from way back from reading the book, because John, do you know John Todd book that I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So there's a book, Race for the World, and he basically was basically following the Traveller Centric Club, list of places, 300 and whatever they are, and of course what Charles did was he sort of, because of his online site, he then the Traveller Centric Club felt obliged to sort of move online and move with the times, and then Nomad Mania came along. It's all been good, it's all good for the community. I don't know about, I've not been sort of on, I only just joined EPS last night because you sent me a text saying, oh, please join. But I've never done Facebook. So that's why, it's never been.
We're list agnostic, so we support all the lists and don't endeavor to make our own lists. So it's purely social and connecting, and I'm on the board of TCC. I have my MTP profile, I have my Nomad Mania profile, and they've all
most people eventually go down every avenue, because they find something that that resonates with them. But I was never a Facebook user, and actually Michael Runkle, when we went to Chad a couple of years ago, he says, you're not on Facebook. I said, no. He says, you must be on Facebook. I said, no, I don't. He says, well, you can't come to Chad then. I said, what is that? He said, well, we need to form a group to do, logistics and that. I said, well, you can do WhatsApp. He said, no, I have a laptop. I said, okay. Anyway, so eventually I went on, but I went on as Jenny Johnson. I went on incognito because I thought, if I go on as Jenny, then I'm not going to ever sort of be tempted to sort of build a profile and post a load of photos and stuff and do all that stuff. And then we rocked up in Chad, and one of the others had it was Christmas, and she'd brought goodie bags for everybody, and she knew that there were 4 girls and 3 blokes, and one of the girls was Jenny. So I got the girls' goodie bag, and actually it was a better goodie bag, I think, than the blokes' goodie bag. So I didn't mind that. And I sort of carried on for a while as Jenny, and it caused great mirth. But then the other day, I linked into a site that was extreme travel group or something like that, and it was there was somebody asking if anybody wanted to go to the BIOT. So I thought, I want to do that for sure. Who doesn't want to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Says, oh yeah, we're going to rent a boat out of the Maldives and stuff and get it all sorted, post COVID. Let's do it. So I said, yeah, I'm interested. And then I realized I'd said, yes, I'm interested as Jenny. And I thought, that's just not going to work. I'll have to come out of the closet. So I did. And then
I put my vote in for that group too. So I'll find Jenny now.
Yesterday, I noticed that EPS now has somebody called Jenny Johnson. Jenny Johnson actually is a member of EPS.
I think that was a joke. I think
real Jenny Johnson, or it's just somebody sort of, following
I think now that we're connecting it, I think that was Petro on your trip to Chad.
Yeah, Petra was on the trip. Yeah, yeah.
So she's one of the people who helps me run this group. So she's the one who mentioned the Jenny thing. So I got all confused.
Well, I don't know. Maybe she said to somebody, "Oh, you know, if you want to go incognito, go as Jenny Johnson." But I don't. But it might be a real Jenny Johnson. I don't know. But,
we've got a few more Indonesia travel related questions. So about Planet Toraja and Sulawesi in general.
yeah, Sulawesi, a great travel choice, I think. Yeah, Tanah Toraja.
That's the first place I ever set foot in
well
Indonesia. I flew and connected there, and that was my first stop.
Yeah, yeah. So that's sort of like, in a way, that's sort of the gateway to the east. But it's got its own culture there. Obviously, you know, being Christian and stuff. Yeah, Toraja itself is, I don't know how it is now, to be honest. I haven't been up there for a long time. But they're I forgot the name now. The UNESCO site up there where they have the stone jars. It's a bit like the Plain of Jars, you know, up in Indochina.
Okay.
That's really worth seeing. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff worth seeing up there. You know, it's a big island. You have also the Togyen Islands, which are brilliant. That's up in the Gulf of Tomini. There's a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff to see in Sulawesi. But again, you know, if you want to, I don't know, Indonesia's just so big. In the old days, you know, you used to get they had a 2-month tourist visa for a while. I have a permanent residence, so I don't really know, but I think I used to meet, you know, tourists who basically were able to spend 2 months, you know, traveling around Indonesia, and that was a pretty good time frame. You get to see quite a lot in that time.
And another one is Nias Island off the west coast of Sumatra.
Yeah, never been. They jump over stone pillars, quite spectacular. I had a project there. We were installing. We won a project to install fuel cells on telecom sites, and it was in Nias. But then I left the company just before they were going to do the installation, so I missed the chance to go up there. So yeah, no, I haven't been to Nias. Siberut is another island up there, which is well worth a visit. Back in the day, it was still pretty much off the grid. I think, you know, with modernization and stuff, they're sort of coming a little bit from the cold, so to speak. But no, there's a lot of, and then you have the Pulau Banyak up there as well. So there's a lot of, you could spend 2 or 3 weeks up in that sort of northwest Sumatra, offshore northwest Sumatra, just exploring those islands, because they're all so different. And you know, that would be a trip. That would be a holiday in itself, I think.
And then, have you been to Bromo during Yadna Kasada or other ceremonial experiences?
During what?
Yadnya Kasada, Yadnya Kasada, Kasada.
No idea what that is, but I've been to Bromo several times. Yeah, and also, yeah, that's that whole area again is great. Being been a hill climber, I kind of focused on the mountain behind it, which is Semeru, which is the highest mountain in Java, and has been active for the last decade or so. So yeah, no, that was actually one of the first trips I took in '91. Took some time. I think before I started work, I took a sort of 10 days out and went out to Bromo and Semeru, and that whole area is beautiful. And there's a lot there, you know.
You mentioned these quick 4-day weekends, seeing different parts of Indonesia. I think it was my 4th or 5th such attempt at a trip coming in from China where I didn't have multi-day delays because of canceled flights or weather, or just all kinds of stuff happening. So speak about the logistics and flexibility needed to travel around Indonesia.
Well, as I say, I mean, to be honest, recently it's just got a lot easier because of the plethora of flights. I mean, you have, and cheap as well. I mean, you know, I don't know how it's going to be now and moving forward, but you know, you really, I mean, if you look at, if you were to plot the sort of network of the flight network for Indonesia, you know, you'd have to take a massive map for a start, because otherwise it'd be just a mess. And you can pretty much get anywhere. Again, you know, in the old days, you know, you had to rely on things like the Pelni shipping service, which is still pretty good. I used Pelni a couple of years ago. Yeah, just to go, you know, just to sort of island hop, and that's pretty good. But to be honest, I've never really had a problem, you know, logistically. I mean, and worst case, there's always transport going places. I mean, this is a quarter of a billion people. But in terms of international travel, again, to be honest, you know, it's always been pretty easy and cheap as well. You know, I fly back to the UK for, you know, a couple of $100 each way now with the cheap, with the Scoot airline and that. So no, I've never really sort of experienced any logistical hassles.
I have a much smaller sample size. I'm trying to think, is it 7 Lion Air flights I've had over time? I think only one of them I've actually been able to fly. So that's
yeah, right. No, I mean that's true. But I mean, wouldn't it be fair to say that you can just get another one, sort of?
Yeah, and that's So I was gonna
another $50.
Where I was gonna go is, are there airlines you recommend? You mentioned there's a whole ton of airlines. So my sample size is so small, but yours is.
Well, no, Lion Air. They basically, the problem is actually, I kind of tell a lie, because the last year or so they've got two big. They've got two, basically. They had two conglomerates which were owning a bunch of airlines, and they all joined together. And now they've done a deal. Basically, they're colluding to keep the price high, because they realize they're pricing each other out of the market. But you have you have Lion Air, you have Wings, Batik, Sriwijaya. Basically anything that's not Garuda is, you know, cheap and cheerful, you know. And then you've got Air Asia. They fly a fair few places. So, you know, coming in via KL or Johor Bahru or probably Bangkok as well. That's and I think they used to fly Jakarta Kuching as well. I'm not sure if they do anymore, but yeah, no, there's a bunch of I mean, they're all really cheap airlines. I mean, if apart from Garuda, I would say most of them are, you know, cheap and relatively cheerful.
Yeah, the Sriwijaya out of East Timor, I remember it was like a full cultural performance. The guy selling duty free in the flight and dancing with scarves.
Yeah, Denpasar you would have done, yeah. Yeah, I used to fly that a lot, because I was working 2016 again with fuel cells. I had a job there, and I was flying in 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, more or less. And yeah, it was quite a performance. Yeah, you had to basically go from in Denpasar as the international and the domestic terminal. Most of the flight was spent shuttling between the two terminals in Denpasar. Yeah, I don't know. The cost of the flight's gone up massively. I think recently I was speaking to mates in Timorese friends, and they were saying, yeah, it's not looking good. So I don't know what the future holds.
Talk about East Timor, that amount of time you've spent, because I think many of the audience here, if they visited for 193 purposes and not necessarily more than a brief visit.
I love it. I mean, I've always loved it, really. The first time I went there was 1993. When I took the sabbatical, and you know, obviously it was part of Indonesia then. It was an occupied, you know, the UN said it was, you know, described it as an occupied territory, but you know, I was in Indonesia. As far as I was concerned, it was part of Indonesia. But I was sort of aware of and nobody talked about, you know, what had gone on. I mean, you had to read sort of subversive press and you know, the dark web, but whatever the equivalent of the dark web was then. And I mean, if you got caught with, you know, sort of Australian literature about East Timor and what had gone on in the 70s, I mean, you were, you know, I would have been kicked out of the country for sure. But yeah, so I rocked up in Timor, they call it, East Timor, in Indonesia, and it was basically you know, I was followed around the country by I was followed around East Timor province, as it was then, by a sort of network of sinister, well, basically spies. I was shadowed by secret police, you know, wherever I went, and it was quite unnerving. At one point, I remember I ran into a group of school kids, and I was asking them, you know, how it was in Timor and how they felt about, you know, being Indonesian, and of course they gave the standard answers, and then I sort of started probing, and started to get a very different response, and this was from school kids. And then afterwards, I walked away and I looked back, and you know, they'd been basically hauled off by some secret policeman.
Oh, wow.
I remember spending a whole night. I was directed to the hotel, the official hotel, and then I doubled back and went to stay in what they call a losmen, a guest house in the market square. And that night, people just came out the shadows, and we started talking about, you know, the real, you know, situation. And I think they thought I was a journalist. So that was my first, you know, my first introduction to Timor-Leste. And then when I went back the next time, it was 2004. It was already Timor-Leste, and it was a very new country, and I was very worried. I thought, well, you know, I remember asking people, well, do you think it's okay if I speak Indonesian? You know, how am I going to communicate? I was there on business. When I got there, it was fine, because I mean, everybody spoke Indonesian. There's a whole generation there of Timor-Lesteans, Timorese, who you know, who's basically, for whom Indonesian was sort of the first, well, the lingua franca, really. So it was fine, and everybody was very nice, and there was a sort of air of freedom about the place. Complete chaos. I mean, you know, this is, you know, ultimately it's always been a chaotic place, you know, and it'll probably always will be. That's kind of part of the charm of the place. Everything broken, UN still everywhere, running the show, heinously expensive, inflated prices. Then I went back again, 2013, again on business, and things had sort of calmed down a bit, and they were sort of finding their feet. And then when I went back in 2016 and I was going in and out, I really got to know the place, and it's, you know, it's very, very different from, you know, from how it was 20 years ago, certainly under the occupation. You know, anything goes. The thing to do there really is to get out, you know, get out of Dili, you know, rent what I used to do on the weekend if I was in town, if I was staying in Timor and not going back to Jakarta, was rent a Hilux, Toyota Hilux, and just go, you know, flat bed in the back, get a sleeping bag. If you get caught short, just sleep in the back. It's just fantastic. I think I went down every road not that many roads, but every track in Timor-Leste. Basically, I mean, there's the history, you know, there's the what do they call it? Dark tourism, is it? Dark tourism. Yeah. There's a bit of dark tourism there. You know, you can go and see where various groups were massacred, where the Australians were massacred. That's a big thing for the Australians, to go up to Balibo and see that. Then there's the hiking, you know, some good mountains, basically up and down the island, really. And then right out east, there's a beautiful offshore island, Jacko, which is just gorgeous. You know, you'd never imagine such a place existed, really. So there's a lot of good stuff there. I think there's a lot. The roads there's a big road building project going on at the moment. The Chinese, of course, are all over the place. I think in the next few years you'll see a lot more investment there on the mining side. I was working with a bunch of guys who were looking at moving in on the mining side, and it never came off because of so many reasons. I mean, there's so many reasons not to get involved in Timor-Leste, but in terms of on a business footing, but in terms of a place to visit, fantastic. And then of course you got Ukusi, which is an enclave separate and completely surrounded by Nusa Tenggara, by Indonesia. That again is magic, a magic place, tiny little enclave. And the reason it's there is because it's the first place the Portuguese landed. So I don't know, they get to keep that little bit. Hire a bike, have a fantastic day or two just up in the mountains. Really, really good. Yeah.
It sounds like you haven't really changed your travels from when you were 25 to where you're sitting today.
Well, that's interesting. That is an interesting observation. I mean, as our Thai friend Pong kept telling me in our Sudan trip, kept saying, how was it back in the day? Well, back in the day, what did you do back in the day? How was Malaysia back in the day? Well, back in the day, did you do this? So back in the day, I mean, obviously, student travel, 80s, you're talking mid-80s student travel. Yeah, I was interrailing, I was hitchhiking, and I'm very glad I got into hitchhiking. And that's always, that's always been a great way to travel, if you've got a bit of time. And just pitching a tent, behind a bush and getting up next day and, moving on. And then when I got here, I was a language teacher. I didn't have much money, and there weren't that many flights anyway back in the day. So you were jumping on the little microbuses that they have here, and that was really my sort of. I mean, that's the way I traveled most of the world, really. I took time out in the mid-90s and went around Southern Africa, and I could easily, I suppose, have sort of taken buses and, A to B to C type travel. And I chose to, just go back to hitchhiking because it was what I knew. And it was fantastic. And then I became a businessman. So I did do a bit of business travel. And of course, the other thing about it is here, for $150, I mean, you can get a no 5-star hotel. I don't know about now, but back in the day, I'm talking 10, 15 years ago, you would have been hard pushed to spend more than $100, on a 5-star hotel. And I was doing a lot of work in Southeast Asia generally. I was a regional manager for Southeast Asia for a while, and I used to travel about and basically travel on the company coin. So I did a bit of that. Last 3 years I haven't worked, so not through choice. But the positive aspect of that is that I've been able to sort of travel to 30 odd countries and do my 193. But yeah, as time has gone on, I've tended to revert to type, I guess.
And any bad experiences?
I'm a Booking.com guy. Really, I'm a Booking.com guy. So I just, wherever I happen to be, if I'm in sort of Ukraine, then I'll just figure out where I'm going to be that night and just go Booking.com and find. There's always a great deal. I never really need to spend much more than $30-40 to get a nice place. There's always some great deal. And certainly, even in the Middle East, I found recently traveling around, the likes of Oman, Bahrain. I mean, you spend $12-15 and you can get a palace sometimes. It's amazing. So I found cheap travel is not necessarily living in a rat infested flea pit. I don't do flea pits. I mean, if I get into a place and I found it's a flea pit, I'll just walk out again. No big deal.
And Mehul's asking, did you have any bad experience hitchhiking or hitchhiking tips?
I've never had a really bad experience. I've had rides with, drug addicts. I mean, who've basically shot up and then got in a car and then picked me up. I've sheep rustlers in Australia. Quite a lot of sheep rustlers. When you get out of the towns into the villages and out into the outback, people do dodgy stuff. So yeah, once I was in a car and they say, well, Ben, they said, we're sheep rustlers. I said, what's that? They said, well, it means we go and steal sheep. I said, okay. So we went and stole a sheep and, slung it in the back. It was quite fun, really, until that night. Then we slit its throat and roasted it over an open fire. That was a little bit unnerving. But I mean, it's not a bad experience. I mean, it'll be in the book. You know what I mean? So it's all a paragraph in the book. I can't say. No, I mean, mostly, you have bad experiences when you get rides with, assholes, basically. But I mean, I haven't had a dangerous. I don't think I've had a single dangerous experience, actually, really. I don't think axe murderers and I mean, if you're an axe murderer, I don't think you go around picking up hitchhikers, to be honest. I mean, notwithstanding the movie.
Yeah.
No, actually, the movie, the maniac was the hitchhiker, right? Not the guy.
Yeah, that's why the people aren't picking you up and hitchhiking.
Right. I remember when I was when I was on that 87 trip in the States, I stayed with some friends as well on the way around, and they were saying, well, obviously you haven't seen the movie The Hitcher. I said, well, I haven't. But then when I actually saw it, I was like, hold on. The maniac is the hitchhiker, not the guy. And I say nowadays, I mean, there are certain places. I mean, I've hitched in lots of different countries. Obviously, it's easier in sort of Western countries, and yeah, right. In the States, it takes some time, but you always get picked. I mean, a lot of people will think, well, they won't pick you up because they don't pick people up nowadays, or they just think, well, why is this guy on the road? He must be a bum, Why isn't he on a Greyhound bus? I tell you, hitchhiking compared to Greyhound buses, I mean, there's no comparison. You want to go to the dark side, get on a Greyhound. Jeez, nightmare. I've had some bad experiences on Greyhound buses, a lot more bad experiences on Greyhound buses, and I've only taken about 4 in my whole life. So go figure. Well, I must have had 1,000 rides, I should think. But I mean, a lot of people now, I mean, you have to go with the flow. I mean, if you get you get a ride. When I was on my 2015 trip, I mean, quite a lot of guys pick you up, truck drivers and so on, and they turn out to be complete, as I say, arseholes, bigots. And you just have to sort of just do the maniac talk, or get out the truck. And then a lot of you get the Christian contingent. They just sort of want to do good, and they ply you full of dollars, and you say, well, actually, no, I'm okay. I'm an oil executive on a break from life. They go, oh yeah, whatever story. I don't know your story, but you look like you need a helping hand. And you get a lot of books, and you have to talk about Jesus and stuff. But it's all it's all part of the experience. I mean, that's why you do it, right? And then you get a ride with some guy who says, "Oh, come and stay in my ranch, with my family for the next 3 days." And you go, "Yeah, okay, that'll be good." So yeah, it's all good generally. I can't say I've had a bad experience.
Oh, it's incredible, and what a great way to close. I think we need to have a regular story hour with you.
There's always time to have a bad experience. I tell you, probably the worst experiences I have nowadays, being mid-50s and not mid-20s, is you try sometimes to you put your backpack on and you think, okay, well I'll take a bivvy bag and I won't take the Motel 6. I'll just pitch and I'll just get him climbing my bivvy bag under this railway bridge, and that's fine. But you get up in the morning sort of all aching, and you think, why the hell did I do that? And you promise yourself, yeah, okay, tonight I'm not going to do that. So for every night spent in the wild nowadays, you have to spend 1 or 2 nights in in a reasonable place. Whereas in the old days, I could go for weeks just sleeping rough. That's the only difference, really. But I hope to continue for long into the future.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us. Enjoy the big festival for Eid, and we want more stories again soon.
No worries. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye.